arms while the lights won't hurt us. Under sky while the stars are falling down. On your wave I would fly beside you. It's too bad I will regret it. It's too bad I ever said it. Ain't nobody gonna have it.
Good afternoon. We are pleased to welcome all those who have joined our online broadcast, and we are about to start our panel discussion on food industry, innovative business formats. We intend to cover a number of relevant issues. What should be the quality of control of food safety, how you could integrate robotics and safety controls, whether safety control by state is at all necessary. Before we start our debate, let me introduce the members of our panel. Mr. Vladimir Rakhmanin, Assistant Director General, Regional Representative for Europe and Central Asia of the Food and Agricultural Organization of the UN, Ksenia Borbacheva, Deputy CEO of Moscow Agency, Dmitry Levitsky, President of the Hurma Group Companies, Artur Chistekov, Managing Director of Uruk Restaurant Chain, Alexander Bobylov, Director of Corporate Food Operations, and Daria Sonkina, founder of Dasha Spice. We would like Mr. Rakhmanin to open our panel discussion. Thank you for being with us. Can you share your views on the exchange of experience with different countries? Thank you, Alexei. I hope everyone can hear me. Yes, yes, we can. Fine. Dear colleagues, friends, good afternoon. I'm Vladimir Rakhmanin, head of the regional office of the Food and Agricultural Organization of the United Nations, based in Budapest, Hungary. I'm really sorry I cannot physically join you, but it's both a pleasure and an honor to speak to you today in view of the fact that I'm a 1980 GIMO graduate myself. Please allow me, during my brief presentation, I should describe it as an introduction, say a few words about our fund, and I would like to share our vision of food safety in the world, and maybe briefly cover the answers to some questions raised. If we consider the practical application of the issues to the industry, you may consider me being more on the philosophical side of the matter. When we deal with agriculture and food industry, the head organization of the UN in charge of combating hunger and agriculture is 75 years old, and I should remind you of the anniversary of our rector, who was 75 last week. And it was the fact that almost 700 million hungry people worldwide, even before the pandemic. And this issue concerns everyone. We had fears concerning the interruptions in the food chain supplies, and indeed restrictions on transportation, closure of restaurants resulted in a loss of farmers' products and in deterioration of the produce. Mostly affected, or most affected, was the population in Africa and in the Middle East. Speaking globally, in order to combat the pandemic effect, we recommend focusing the humanitarian aid to the most affected countries, improvement of the statistical data as a basis for decisions by state and businessmen, social support to farmers, and fourthly, assisting trade and improving safety standards for food. And fifthly, increasing the sustainability of agriculture and prevention of disease among the domestic animals and ensure sustainability of food systems. It has shown once again the importance of an overall national health in order to resist the disease, including improving the immune systems, in order to limit the application of antibiotics and to educate children about the benefits of healthy nutrition. We pay particular attention to biodiversity and the improvement of soil. The institutions in charge of control and safety of quality and safety of food products had to adapt to the current changes by changing recipes and introducing new technologies and methods for food industry. And the FAO has been able to adapt its principles to the current situation. When the buyer was unable to perform its obligations on purchases, we had to arrange the safe preservation of food products, paying particular attention to the issues of personal hygiene, although I would like to mention in brackets that it has not been proven that the virus could be transferred via food. I do believe this is the level that we have achieved, and it will be continued in the forthcoming season. I'm sure those representing the public catering industry will share their views with us. To us, it is important that we should implement innovations to increase productivity and sustainability, including meteorological data, robots, and at the same time, while trying to engage more women in the agricultural production, and at the same time paying due attention to the preservation of our heritage. And no innovation can replace a human being. FAO has been improving its practices for data processing, and we have started work in a specialized statistical platform, including the one for international agriculture, to make it a platform that would be available in 2021 for the countries to exchange and share best practices. Speaking of the role of the state, yes, it is important, but the state must always take into account the interests of the business community and the civil society while defining the measures that may be most effective. And once the decision has been taken, to implement them in the best possible manner. And we must do all our best in order to guarantee the stable supply of food products. The pandemic will end sooner or later, but we will continue work on the sustainable food systems. Thank you. Thank you for participating in our discussion. Now I would like to address the issue of changes in the consumer or user behavior, and I would like to give the floor to Ksenia Barbacheva. Can you share your views on how this behavior may have changed? Thank you. Perhaps I could do without a visual presentation, but indeed, everything that we have seen during this crisis period has demonstrated the lack of 100% preparedness of the retail sphere or the food industry for this kind of shock. However, it was somehow a stimulus to boost the development of the retail service, and speaking statistically, such rates would not have been possible for another 5 or 6 years. But the COVID pandemic, in Russia in particular, in some countries, made it possible for companies to increase their income by over 80%, to an extent, to a considerable extent, due to the new COVID situation. The online trade in Russia generates 2.5 trillion rubles, and we expect a considerable growth of these indices, which is threefold higher than 2019, and there has never been any such fast growth in the food sector before. All producers of products and services have increased their online presence. The applications related to purchasing goods online or ordering food from restaurants have been among the 3 top most widespread applications. Speaking of market trends, we have been in close touch with the industrial experts and producers of food, as well as with major retailers and restaurateurs. And what we could say now is that all the trends which are observed in consumer behavior today are similarly observed in the food industry. In the consumer behavior, the number of trends have not been so numerous, but we must mention at least one: to consume wisely or reasonably. If before a consumer could have indulged in excessive consumption, today the population seems to be using food more sensibly. And the growth of the number of online orders is an important index. And I must mention, when answering the question, one of the target audiences was the most active one in the number of online orders. We can mention all age groups, even those above 65, because that group actually was forced to learn to use their gadgets, and there were rather stringent lockdown measures introduced in Moscow, and even senior citizens learned to use their gadgets. Another trend is for improvement of digital skills of the user. Speaking of the change in demand, many retailers and food industry officials say that despite online orders and online activity, which will stay at the same level, perhaps, we will see what may be described as omni-channel activity, because people will be using that platform more and more. And at the moment, we are observing the more important formats of dark stores or pickup points, and in launching of startups. One of those is called Much Salmon, if I'm not mistaken. And a colleague of ours, Mr. Sisoev, is actively engaged in the development of restaurant business, and they seem to be developing this so-called dark store. Speaking of other trends, development trends, we are now faced with the need for a speedy delivery, and here we must mention collaborative services. Lots of those were launched by different services during the pandemic. One of those is Yandex Yeda, which is Yandex Food or Yandex Meal Delivery, and other types of collaborations. We must also keep in mind digitalization of traditional food businesses. For instance, the pizza production, Dodo Pizza among them, seem to be growing in a very rapid way, and they have relied on digitalization, and this helps increase income. And one other trend is important on food and change dishes developed with the chosen by consumer. And this is the so-called personalized meals. This is something that could be replicated in the regions. If we mention international or wild world level of investment, the major volume of investment is seen in the U.S. Into 3D printers, food products actually printed in 3D, growing or printing salads is a very popular technology in America today. Here in Russia, you know Vkusvil, which is engaged in developing vertical farms and growing its own lettuces by or through innovations. Russia doesn't seem to be falling behind.
But still, there are interesting innovations. You have 1 minute to finish up. So I should mention here what the city is doing in order to help this sector and to develop and introduce new tendencies. The Department of Health of Food Supply realizes a lot of projects. One of them is food accelerators aimed at developing innovations in the sector with the participation of corporations and city structures. The startups have an opportunity to address the accelerator, show their product, then develop it to the stage when it becomes of interest to corporations. So if we talk about retail or food tech, then X5 and Magnet and Vkusvil and many clients. There are many clients in this market. The city supports this program and promotes the startups in various accelerators in different sectors. We have at least 20 participants of the acceleration program, and they have a chance to develop and enter international markets and start projects and pilot projects in cooperation with the department and the city bodies. Several successful cases have already been implemented. All the information is available on our site devoted to the Moscow Accelerator. And as you have seen here, the stands of the Department of Business supports businessmen, provides various subsidies and support measures. So we'll be ready to see you addressing us, and we're always glad to see new, so to say, stars, new companies which can grow to become companies like Yandex or Kaspersky, the leaders of the market that we'll be proud of. Thank you. Now I would like to invite Dmitry Levitsky to take part in the discussion. How can we forecast the growth of expenses for outside of the house food? Yes, a businessman and also dealing with restaurants. When we started our business, our task was to increase the expenses of people for meals outside. And in the past months, the situation put everything upside down. And some of the businesses are no longer in the market, and we are now gradually climbing out of the hole in which we found ourselves. Now there are some tendencies we have been observing in our sector and the socium which affects our sector, and I would like to focus on these tendencies. So I won't speak about our company, I will speak in a more general way. So good news is the fact that people stop cooking at home. They cook at home less and less. Dear ladies, thank you for this tendency that you don't want to cook at home. This helps our industry great, and that increases the expenses for outside meals. Of course, not only ladies cook at home. I don't want any discrimination. Men do as well. But in our Russian tradition, it's women who are more responsible for meals at home. Of course, so they are busy, they have jobs, and they have less and less time for cooking at home. And in the family, women are losing the competences of cooking. So everything is being automatized, like also cleaning the house. Another important factor is that people start families much later compared to the past. Women between 20 and 25 now don't want to start a family and start cooking at home. They're interested in their careers. So on the one hand, it's a very good signal that our industry will start developing and grow, but nothing of the kind. But because what is happening is ready-made meals are growing, the sector of ready-made meals. People don't buy food stuff, but they buy ready-made meals. So this market is developing with the participation of all supermarkets. We are considering the situation, whether this reduces the trade of restaurants or not. Maybe it is just a substitute when you do not buy raw potatoes, but you buy cooked potatoes, but that's not a substitute for meals in the restaurants. So this sector is developing. Every supermarket has a zone of ready-made meals, and starting with Karavaev's outstanding success when they showed the example of non-expensive, good meals. So most probably in the future we'll buy ready-made meals rather than cook at home. And that does not provide any good influence on restaurants. It's just chipping away from our market. Now, again, continuing with the restaurants, I would like to show that we do not only sell food, we sell atmosphere, we buy service, but people need this less and less. They reserve tables through applications, don't need people, don't need waiters. They want to come and see the food on the table, and many startups start dealing with this, and the new technology allows clients to come into the restaurant and see no one. You order everything from home on your iPad. You come, the food is on the table. You also pay from your telephone, and you do not even say hello or goodbye to anyone. This tendency is also on the rise. And in the past, people would meet in the restaurants because they needed a meeting place. But the new generation do not need this kind of meetings. They communicate in chats, in communication gadgets. They do not need to go to a bar for a talk with friends. They are always in touch online. We, in our young days, resorted to this tendency of going to the restaurants. So nowadays, people do not need restaurants for communication. They keep in touch. And Max Polzikov said, in the future, we won't compete with each other. We would compete for how to get people out of the house. Because they stay at home, they discussed everything with their friends. They decided where is the best pizza. He ordered it and it was delivered to him. They don't have to go to the restaurant. So what is important for us in the future to think how to get people out of their houses, to go to a restaurant. So as a sector, we have two paths which we can choose. And I'm sure both of them would keep developing. First of all, this digitalization, artificial intelligence, computers, they are developing very, very fast, unbelievably fast. And pandemic provided a great push for the development of this sector. And we see it every day. McDonald's shows fully robotized food halls, and other companies do likewise. When you come to a hall and you don't see a single human being, everything is robotized, so everything is done by robots, by IT, and there are lots of examples. In Chicago last year, So there is a zone with the largest restaurant exhibition, and every year we see how IT and robots innovations increase in a geometric progression. But we cannot close our eyes. If you want to continue with restaurants, you need to move ahead to invest money. Otherwise, you will lag behind. But the progress is very fast. And for ordinary people, for small companies, it's very difficult to find their niche in this market, because this is the market of huge companies who have money to pay for these technologies. And for small companies like in our country, it's very difficult to get on this ship. Yes, you can join some small boat, but that will also cost a lot of money. This is one path. Well, in this sphere, I am an old believer, old faith believer. So for me, all of those non-made operated approaches are not acceptable. I look at this as the food supplier for people. You come and get your food. And there is no hospitality here, no soul, no atmosphere, nothing that we appreciate in the restaurant business. Therefore, I'm sure that the second path will also exist. There will be restaurants with people cooking, with people saying hello, with people bringing your food and your plate and cleaning the table. And with time, I think this will be the privilege of rich people. Of course, IT and robots bring down the price of this service. You can get cheap soup, but rich people will be able to afford going to a restaurant where soup will be made by a human being. It will be brought by a human being. So, and that's continuation of the same tendency. Rich people's children will have people as teachers, and for young people and for old people will have robots as teachers, and the same will be true of the medical services and so on. So for restaurants, of course, prepared by people, food will be more expensive than the food prepared by robots. Not everybody will be able to afford it. Now we have at the point where we are supposed to make a choice, whether you follow one path or the other. So many of us are now on the crossroads. We are trying to do both, introducing IT into our business at the same time. What is to be done not to lose people? That's what I wanted to share with you about the development of our industry and our vision of this development. Thank you, Dmitry. Now I would like to give the floor to the expert of restaurant business, Arthur Chestikov. And please share with us your experience and your opinion about developing delivery services. Thank you. I want to make use of this opportunity. Dmitry declared that you meet online, there will be no restaurants and bars. So, and I would like to ask a question. Your experience, your impression. Do you really think that we can do without online contacts? Yes, people still go to bars for their meetings, and other people are simply underage. That's good news. I'm glad to hear that. I think it's too early to say goodbye to the restaurant industry. It's definitely going to change, and I have huge presentations. I have conducted much research, compared the Chinese, American markets, and saw the tendencies of developments. Now, I deleted all this from my presentations and don't need them. So, in the past, people looked through magazines, looked for articles, found something interesting, some interesting articles. and decided what sphere is more beneficial. Now that's not the approach. Now you cannot rely on the information which is 4 or 5 months old. You cannot build your strategy relying on this old data. I don't know whether it's good or bad. I think that probably it is good. It's a challenge. The restaurant business is a lottery. Dmitry may correct me, but I think about 15% of projects grow up and become successful. If you think in the future to go into this business, remember 15%. The figure is 15%. Well, I think that the figure is still higher, maybe higher. So what has happened now is a radical change in the restaurant business. As Dmitry said, nobody knows how it's going to develop in the future, whether people will continue going to bars or maybe you will get drunk or online. I have prepared some slides which I would like to share with you to describe the prospects from our point of view, where the effort should be made to develop the technology in our sector. And the first news I want to share, it's just one piece of news which is bad and good at the same time. We must admit that the restaurant industry, from the point of view of digitalization, is a relic of the past. It's very difficult to find something as old, as ancient as the restaurant business. This is bad. What's good about it? What is good is that this is a sphere of opportunity. Yes, you sit and think how you can start something new here, so that as a result you can get so much money, then you can go to the state and buy a house. Now I will tell you what are the possibilities here, what this sector is lacking. I have here 5 spheres where you can work, where there is a need for development, and the restaurants will buy these ideas. First is marketing, electronic marketing. I don't know a single example where restaurants have an electronic system like this. Though I don't know where you have more human contact with people, with the exception of medicine. But restaurants are about human communication, about meeting people. And the program of loyalty is important, and waiters recognize you. Sometimes they recognize you not because they have seen you before, but because they have your image in the computer, or they have a profile in the computer. This can be realized. This is one of the paths for development. And when you see this personified approach, then that's the place where you will go to, in your casual clothes. Yes, it will be kind of barman who is familiar to you because he sells you beer. Now, second one is personification of the market. The next one is automatization of the purchases. In many restaurants, they still have people who keep the store. The storekeeper, this person prepares food orders from the cook, from the barman, and orders cook using telephones, phones the supplier in the evening, and the cooks and the barman make their own orders, give it to the store minder, and he receives the order next morning, and this brings him his wages. I'm sure that there are projects which are not yet implemented, but these are attempts. Not to have a huge database, not data-driven technologies, but still using the story of sales, which can be used, and relying on the technological cards, you can know what food supplies to order, and this will reduce your expenses. Next is personnel management. Now, the obstacle to developing this technology is our backwardness. Can you suggest to the cook to work for 6 hours? only 12 hours, only no short turns. I think this will change soon. In other countries, I think this became regular practice. In McDonald's, it's quite okay to work 4 turns. Whether you're a student or young mom, this is maybe 4 hours, not 4 turns. So when the mentality of our servicemen working in this sector changes, then this approach can become very useful. So the recipe is the same. You rely on the history of sales, the forecast, precise as possible. If it is a small restaurant, maybe this service is not needed, but if you have a large delivery service or multi-sector projects, then you can sell this approach to them. Next is history of sales. The champions, the most developed companies know about abolitionism. Do you know what this term means? But it's because not from you, from this service. This is the analysis of the request for meals, for dishes. There are some major dishes which are rated AAA, which are popular, marginal, and something else. And the more dishes you have like this, the better are the results.
Some have been implementing this, but this can be further developed, and when developing a new menu, you can match the need of your clients even better. I know a thing or two about the delivery services, and they cannot do without technologies, and the cost of one order must really go down, as must the delivery time. And this should be done through a very careful regulation of time of delivery, and I don't think I'm mistaken. So the speed of delivery is a key consideration. I would recommend that to any restaurant. Yes, speaking of delivery, as Dmitry said before, it is less and less part of public catering. It is more an separate, independent industry. There have been lots and lots of investments. It may or may not be profitable. As to how you can oppose aggregators, if you take Dodo Pizza, they do not use the services of aggregators, but on the other hand, you can coexist with aggregators. As to conclusions, I should probably present and sell myself to you. You may take a look at the book I wrote about how to launch a successive delivery service. It was a pleasure to speak to you. Thank you. Thank you very much for this most exciting and insightful presentation. Now I would like to give the floor to Alexander Bobilov, and I would like you as an expert to discuss the impact of new technologies. In fact, the level of digitalization is extremely low in the restaurant business. The public catering is a low-margin kind of business. That may be one reason why it is so. So we were the last, actually, to get involved in the process. It could be viewed conclude from 2 points. Something to do with the customer, phone order placement, service by rote, and on the other hand, it's the feedback data processing. And this is done by whoever is involved as an operator in the business. Everyone can see that things have to be done, and what is being done is to draw the attention of the younger generation. Speaking of major companies, some old established restaurant holdings, like for instance one I represent, for us it may be more of a problem to convert to digitalization. We are diversified, we have lots of formats, we are employing different personnel management, so we cannot have a, so to say, ready-made or a turnkey decision. Those who are only emerging companies or trying to get into the market, they can more easily adapt ready-made decision and install them on their own practices. We have to adjust some of the suggested solutions to our particular line of businesses because we do not have any uniform format that would be acceptable by everyone. But the future does lie with digitalization. There are those who are older faith believers, as was said before, but there are those who seem to ride the wave of digitalization, so they would try and make the effort to attract the interest of the younger generation and the middle class. This is where we should look at and aim to introduce and integrate digitalization and 3D glasses teaching methods, either mini startup decisions that could be replicated in small organizations. That's a kind of future, but it's not a universal pill. Please, can you say how the work of the restaurants has transformed during the pandemic? There's just one more visible trend. That means delivery, not only of ready-cooked or pre-cooked meals, but there had never been any other services. We are trying to diversify. We have our own ready meal factory, and this is something that may or may not be favorable from the business point of view. What may motivate our customers at the moment, we cannot say, because we are only at the beginning. At the crisis period, many companies still have some of their personnel working online. If we mention Moscow, St. Petersburg, and other such big cities, the situation is when some of the restaurants have simply dropped out of business altogether. And we perhaps may introduce a new interest such as national coloring and with particular attraction to tourists, like, for example, the famous Pushkin restaurant in Moscow. There's an overall digitalization underway. Everyone seems to be sharing photos, short messages, and the restaurant business may be an engine for moving everything. It's not so much to do with taste and comfort, but the look of the meal and the degree of its visual attractiveness is very important. So we want to make our dishes more photogenic and presentable. We cannot find a universal decision that would apply to everyone. We must be more creative, but simply by increasing quality is not enough. What about the small businesses and Mary Mezonkina? Can you say a few?
Меня зовут Даша. У меня несколько проектов. Значит, мой первый проект
Dasha's Pies is one of our projects, and these are some kind of things that we understood was not working with an average bill of about 5,000 ruble, which is a very low figure indeed. And when everyone stayed at home, there was very little celebration of anything. The average bill has dropped considerably. So during the pandemic, this sort of story doesn't work. And when everyone started mentioning in Facebook that everything is very bad, things are sad, and you should approach delivery services, Yandex.Eida, or and at the very top are those who have a minimum price of the bill, and the baking to order is a complicated matter because due to technological nuances, this cannot help. We actually faced an interesting situation. It seemed that we rely heavily on empathy, human relations, and interaction. The story goes like this. A relative of mine gave me 5,000 rubles saying, cook something for the doctors in the Kommunarka complex. There was no undercurrent, and some others started asking questions. How can we subscribe to this initiative? Those who were in the lockdown wanted to help the doctors in this difficult situation. So there was a button on our site which is lunch for doctors, and for 3 months we carried on with this project. So there were clients or customers or potential customers or those who were involved sent us 6 million rubles. I do think it's a lot of money because I'm not a big business owner and I don't have so many subscribers, and this is how we were able to send food to 5 hospitals, and this is how my business survived during the pandemic, which was cool. And at the same time, we had a project which is called Bunch. That means cans or jars of sauces and side dishes. Everyone seems to see this in a different way. Some insist on healthy food, no sugar, no gluten, relying on safety, that it's safe for the baby, and this is how our sources emerged. Sometimes a woman cooking at home, but we try to share this chore with my husband, but sometimes myself, we have 2 children, and we cannot entirely rely on pizza or pasta, ready-made pasta, but I don't want to spend all my time on cooking. I have more interesting things to do, so the canned meat and sauces may make my food more attractive. Homemade canned meat added to pasta and spiced with some sauce makes a dish ever so more attractive. And we traveled in Russia. This summer we were unable to travel abroad, so we now have lots of orders for these cans or jars to take on holiday. And one of Moscow region festivals, art festivals, they are interested in eating but not in cooking. Our service proved particularly useful and convenient for them. So despite the pandemic, my motto, I'm not actually a business person myself. I'm a linguist and a translator/interpreter, and I relied on intuition, and I'm something of a daredevil. I started a small cafe business just 2 weeks after the lockdown. It's a tiny space of about 30 square meters, and I'm now sorry we have rented such a small space. But it's an interesting story because we do witness a need for human empathy and interpersonal communication. With limited space and number of employees, I keep telling my employees that if someone comes to a friendly place where he is welcomed, and when the waiter remembers or the barista remembers that you had previously asked for a cappuccino, that makes your customer feel more comfortable and at ease. And such types of businesses are just as necessary as other types of services. This element of human touch and human empathy should be preserved and should be related through the quality And during the summer, we asked ourselves this question, what is the socially responsible business about? Maybe it's to do with people with peculiar features of physical development or older people. I think it's to do with those who want a degree of human responsible relation and attitude. Thank you very much. The time of our debate has now come to an end, and I do appreciate all our speakers for participating. Thank you.